Hi, welcome to Radio 4's Consumer Programme. Today we'll be looking at pensions and where to start if you want to learn how to understand them. It's a decade since Dieselgate, when VW was caught out cheating emissions tests.
Volkswagen recalls hundreds of thousands of cars in America where it's accused of deliberately flouting air pollution rules.
How Dieselgate changed the car market, we'll be talking about that. And after the UK's hottest summer on record, sales of air conditioning systems have soared.
My wife and I both work from home, and our home office can become unbearable during a heatwave. We've had a fair few of those this summer.
We'll be looking at what's on the market, how much energy they use and what they cost. If you'd like to get in touch, email us please, you and yours at bbc.co.uk, or text us. Send your messages to 84844. But first,
I am a gambling addict. I signed up to GamStop and put blocks on my account 2 years ago and successfully stopped gambling.
those are the words of someone on TikTok who posts as Blossom, read by one of our team. Now, GamStop that she mentioned is a self-exclusion service that prevents people who have problems with gambling from gambling online. So Blossom had problems, she had stopped gambling but then started again. She didn't walk into a casino or a bookies though. She was scrolling on TikTok where she came across live videos of people raffling things, toys mainly, things like Jellycats and Labubus.
After avoiding raffles on here for months, I eventually started buying tickets for them. It's my fault, I know, but the creators doing these raffles watch people like me spend £50 a night on their raffles without winning anything, and don't ever say anything. Again, I understand it's a me problem, but they know people are addicted and they take advantage of it. A lot of the people buying the tickets are vulnerable. I've stopped now and won't buy any more, but I'm upset with myself for breaking 2 years of no gambling for silly TikTok raffles.
Well, those posts from Blossom are left under a video, posted by Sarah Rosenthal. She's another TikTok user, and she's been drawing attention to these TikTok raffles. Sarah, hi and welcome. For those who don't use TikTok, could you explain what these raffles are like and how they work?
Hi there, yeah, of course. So basically, they come across on live videos and they look similar to what you might see in a school or a charity raffle. Usually the prizes are numbered and they can win a prize if it ends with a 0 or a 5. They usually have a few different prizes. Some of them are much more limited than others, but one thing they don't show you is how many tickets are actually in the container that you're choosing from. So there could be 10 prizes, but there could be 1,000 tickets that they have to sell to win those 10 prizes. And it's very damaging because, you know, you go on TikTok to scroll and maybe see some art or dancing or some news, and instead you're flooded with these TikTok lives of people that are running illegal tombolas and raffles.
So how do you pay then? How do you buy your ticket?
So that's another thing that's actually quite dangerous about this, is the hosts seem to be posting their full bank details online. So they'll be in the background of these videos with their sort codes and account numbers and their full names that are on the account, which of course banks would very much advise against doing because they're your private details for your account. Some of them do use PayPal as well. They'll advise that you pay through PayPal, but they always tell you that you have to pay with friends and family, which means essentially they don't get charged any fees, but you're also at liberty that you won't be able to get a refund if something went wrong.
So you decided that you would speak out against them, and you've described them as illegal. How did you know so much about them, and why did they bother you so much?
Yeah, so it actually started as just a bit of a silly video because I went on TikTok myself one night, and whilst I was scrolling through videos, every now and again a live video will pop up and be recommended to you. And I kept on getting these raffles, and I thought to myself, as someone who started a small business, I wanted to host some giveaways, and I did a lot of extensive research to make sure that what I was doing was fully legal, and the way that I would have people enter was fully legal. And obviously for me that was a giveaway, so no one was paying anything. But what I had researched within giveaways came up with a lot of information about raffles and tombolas as well, that if you wanted to hold these, you know, there's certain rules and regulations around them. So when I saw them, I did start by just asking these users, you know, are these for charity?
Because that is allowed. We should say that is allowed. We all know that. We see those church fates and everything.
Of course.
Yeah, so if it's for charity,
any
it's
raffles
okay.
and things, that all of the profits are for charity, they are legal. They are legally allowed to host these. So yeah, I thought I'd ask the users, you know, maybe these are all for charity, and I'll ask them, these hosts, whether that's what they're doing. And I was told no on numerous occasions. And then I tried to say to them in a nice way, you know, do you have the correct sorry, I forgot
the regulations in place.
The regulations
Systems.
And the whether it's all legal and above board and things. And they said to me that it's just a bit of fun. You're not forced to play. If you don't like it, don't watch. And I thought that was quite an aggressive tone to take to someone who's just asking very basic questions. So I ended up making this video, not expecting it to blow up actually and have lots of people agree. If anything, I expected people to get quite annoyed about it, the same way that they did, the hosts did.
But so actually you got a lot of support, didn't you, when you put your video up pointing out that these are actually unlawful gaming? Yeah,
I was shocked. And obviously when I saw comments from Blossom and other users saying that they'd spent hundreds of pounds and they hadn't won anything, or they slipped back into this phase because, you know, you don't go on TikTok and expect to see gambling and tombolas on there. It was quite eye-opening. And I thought, well, as much as I've made a silly video about it, I might as well do some more research and see what I can say to people for them to be able to help. Because unfortunately, a lot of people said they would report them to TikTok, but TikTok didn't take the videos down. They were flagged that they were not breaking any TikTok laws, which obviously is not true, but we know that TikTok uses quite a lot of AI and robotics to sort of flag their videos if they do look wrong. And I suppose just from the layout of how the raffles and tombolas are set up, there's no violence or anything, so they're not immediately flagged as being unallowed on the platform.
We asked TikTok about it, and they told us that they prohibit the facilitation of gambling on the platform and have taken action against a number of accounts. I guess one of the things they do, but you know TikTok better than I do, is that they encourage you, don't they, to stay on the site when you pay. So you said that these people have their bank details on the screen. That is getting around the TikTok systems, I suppose.
Yeah, so none of them that I have seen actually use TikTok, because you can sell on TikTok, you can use it as a selling platform, but I haven't seen any that use TikTok to gain the money from the ticket sales through their platform. So yeah, they'll post, their full bank details on there instead, so that it's a direct bank transfer. Or like I said, they sometimes use PayPal as well, so they'll post an email address, but they request that you send it friends and family to avoid PayPal fees. So yeah, I'm not sure why TikTok obviously have allowed so many of them. It does seem very extensive. Like I say, the comments are flooded with people who are saying that they come on TikTok after work or something to wind down, and their live streams are just flooded with these raffles and tombolas and people telling them to spend their money and be in a chance to win these prizes.
Let me bring in Melanie Ellis. She's a partner at Northridge Law, and she's a gambling regulation specialist. Melanie, you've had a look at these raffles for us. What do you make of them? Should they be allowed to be taking place on TikTok?
Hi, Winifred. Yeah, I mean, firstly, I just want to say I have a lot of sympathy for Blossom and others affected by this, and that there is help and support available for people who are struggling with their gambling. So I just wanted to mention that first. But yes, so the UK's Gambling Act makes it an offence to promote or facilitate a lottery unless it's properly licensed or exempt in some way. And simply a lottery is any process where people are required to pay to take part. There's a random draw and then there's a prize awarded to one or more of the participants. And some people have a misconception that if it's a raffle for an item, then it's treated differently. Perhaps it's just a bit of fun. But any prize, whether it's cash or an item like a jelly cat that I've seen on these raffles, it's all covered by the same law. So if somebody's offering a raffle like this, then they either need to get a license from the Gambling Commission, be registered with their local authority, and those options are available only for charities and other non-commercial societies, or they need to make some change to what they're doing to take it outside of the definition of a lottery.
So to take it outside the definition, as I understand it, you have to allow some free access to it. So there has to be a way that you can take part in it without paying anything.
Yeah, that's right. So there's two main ways that people use it. And the first is this free entry route. And quite often you will see on things like house raffles that you might see online that there's an option to enter, for free by post.
I see. And that's what you would have to do to make it come within the rules. We spoke to the Gambling Commission about these TikTok videos, and they said, we're aware of unlicensed lotteries on TikTok. We're engaging with the platform to get them removed. They say the law is simple in this area. If you run an illegal lottery, you could face prosecution. If you're convicted, you could be fined or even imprisoned. And they also warn customers using online lotteries that they may find the draws are rigged, that the prizes are non-existent, that when they give their payment details and their identity, that makes them at risk of theft. And they also say that these lotteries are unlikely to have the necessary safeguards in place to prevent underage gambling or tackle gambling harm. Melanie, do you think it's likely that the Gambling Commission will come down heavily on people or not?
Well, it's quite difficult for the Gambling Commission to prosecute in these sorts of cases because you've got a number of individuals hosting raffles and they perhaps just do it a few times and then they might disappear from TikTok. The Gambling Commission has limited resources, so it needs to prioritise its action against really the worst offenders in this case. And it particularly would become interested if a raffle was deliberately targeting children, for example.
OK, lovely. Thanks for your time. That was Melanie Ellis from Northridge Law, and also Sarah Rosenthal. Thanks both. Now, we'll be talking about pensions and income in retirement later on in the programme. A report for the homeless charity Crisis is warning that people's housing costs are forcing them to work longer. House prices to buy and to rent have risen sharply in relation to incomes. Crisis surveyed 1,600 people aged over 55 who were on low incomes, and nearly 1 in 5 of them said they couldn't afford to retire because of their housing costs. Leah's in that situation. She's 69. She lives in Oxfordshire. Lee works as an agent selling high-end properties, but she's renting her home. She told me about her circumstances.
I rent an end of terrace stone one-bedroom cottage in Oxfordshire. I moved from Abingdon just to save rent, moving up to West Oxfordshire. And unfortunately, there's a clause in the rental agreement that says that the rent would increase with a cost of living. So because of inflation, my rent is now over £1,000 a month, which is more than what I was paying in South Oxfordshire.
Oh, how disappointing for you. Yeah, that is tough. So why won't you be able to afford to pay that £1,000 a monthly when you give up your work?
It's because my pension at that time will be £1,000 a month. So basically my housing cost, just to keep a roof over my head, would be the same as what I would be receiving in my pension.
So how is it that you've retired on pretty much just the basic state pension, Lee?
It's because of some was relocation and just never making enough to put any money aside to be able to afford a deposit down on a house. I am in my situation that I did own a house, but for 25 years, and then through a divorce, was now the settlement just allowed me enough for a deposit down on a flat in terms of a rental flat, and then to set up house. So since then, over the past 10 years, I've just because of my age and because of earning potential, I'm not able to afford to actually buy anywhere else. So I'm in the situation I am.
It must be a huge worry for you.
Yeah, it is. It is. Looking at, what I can do about that situation as when I do stop work, there are various schemes, but it's still going to take at least 50% of my income. And then I'm not really sure where I'm going to be living then, and maybe have to move away from family and friends. So it's a bit of a lottery, actually.
Well, let me bring in Francesca Albanese. She's the Executive Director of Policy and Social Change at the housing charity Crisis. Francesca, the people that you surveyed, they're not all renting, are they?
No, so we also spoke to people through the research who still have a mortgage. From what Lee said, and really saddened to hear kind of the situation you're in, Lee, because for many people, spending lots and lots of money on housing costs is not out of the ordinary, and particularly when we're talking about older people, it's obviously more difficult to top up income, and so that's why when we surveyed people, we found that huge amounts of people in older age are really struggling with their housing costs, and that's having a massive impact in other areas of their life.
What advice would you give someone in Lee's situation?
So I think that there are organisations out there who can help with your situation at the moment in terms of higher housing costs, so people like Independent Age or Citizens Advice. I think the other thing to say is if you are worried at being at risk of homelessness, it is worth approaching your local authority for assistance. But I would also stress that unfortunately we're in a situation where lots of people are spending 50% or more on their housing costs because that is the only option they have, and that means cutting back on other essentials, and we spoke to lots of people who cut back on their heating and also were spending less on food, not going out as much, and it's that social isolation piece as well that's really worrying.
Francesca, if you're older and you're struggling to pay rent, at what point do benefits kick in?
So it depends on what rented sector you're in. So there's obviously the social rented sector where if you are on a lower income, you can access housing benefits, but it depends on kind of what your income is and your individual circumstances. When we're talking about the private rented sector, we are in a slightly different situation. So we've seen local housing allowance is what is used to pay for housing benefit in local housing allowance for the private rented sector, and we've seen that frozen. And so unfortunately that means that it becomes less and less affordable for people who are maybe in Lee's situation where they've gone into a private rented home. They may be thinking that they could have afforded it on the income that they're on, whether that's from being able to access benefits or from their kind of income from work, or a mixture of both. And then that rent goes up and there isn't very much that can be done. However, local housing allowance is set at a particular rate. And what we found is over the years, because it's been frozen, it's increasingly less and less affordable. So some research we did recently found that actually in England, only 3% of properties are affordable at local housing allowance rates for people on benefits, which is really just not affordable at all. And that's something we're asking the government to relook at the moment to bring it back in line with rents.
What happens in practice if you have a mortgage you can't afford? You just have to sell up, I guess.
There are some benefits available, but very limited. I think, it's definitely, if you're a homeowner with a high mortgage, that it is looking at kind of selling your property and going into something cheaper. And we know, obviously, for lots of people, that stability of having a home is something that is really important. Most people will pay their housing costs over and above lots of other things, but that does then have a huge impact in terms of people's well-being and health. Not being able to eat properly, heat your house properly, which is definitely something we saw in our research is happening at the moment. And at the very extremes, we are seeing more and more people being pushed into homelessness. So the reason why we did this research was through our own services, we've been seeing a significant increase of people coming to us who are age 55 and over. And government statistics show in England, we've seen a 50% increase in the last 5 years of people age 55 approaching their local authority who are homeless and needing assistance.
What are the chances, would you say, of finding social housing that is more affordable? I guess it varies depending on where you live.
It does vary by area, but I'd say we're in a situation where over consecutive years we've not built enough social homes. And so if you are looking to get on the social housing waiting list or register for social housing, in lots of areas now that waiting list is really high. And in fact, some research we did recently jointly with others showed that in some areas, those waiting lists are 100 years or longer. And whilst if you are an older person, you will have some preference in terms of older ages of vulnerability that's kind of taken into account. We're in a situation where there just isn't any homes at all. And so it will take often years to get access to social housing. Something, again, we want more action on. So really positive to see there's been recent announcements about investment in social housing because we definitely need it. And particularly, across all generations, we need more social homes. And the housing crisis really is an intergeneral issue now. But particularly for older people, it's incredibly important to have that stability. But we now need to get building and making sure that kind of investment sort of ends up in delivery.
Lee, what do you think you will do?
Well, I think I'd like to stay in West Oxfordshire, and they have Home Seekers Plus, which is, again, a scheme where you have to qualify, but then you can get reduced rent on properties. Problem is, like Francesca said, it was availability, and there really, in this sort of general area, aren't that many properties. And what I found from my research in the past is that housing associations actually take precedent for people who have children, and that seems to be families and children, so that older people don't actually be in the band to being offered properties. But that's what I've been able to find out to date on what I can do in the future.
That was Lee and Francesca Albanese from Crisis talking to me earlier. We asked government housing departments across Britain about affordable housing for older people. We were told big investments are being made in affordable housing and in supporting people who become homeless. It's been 10 years since the Dieselgate emissions scandal first came to light. Back in 2015, Volkswagen admitted to using software, cheat devices, during official tests that made its diesel cars appear cleaner than they were. Here are some BBC News clips from the time.
Volkswagen recalls hundreds of thousands of cars in America where it's accused of deliberately flouting air pollution rules.
The scandal that's rocking the car industry shows no sign of dying down at VW's headquarters in Wolfsburg. Chief Executive Martin Winterkorn, who apologised yesterday, will fight for his job during hastily arranged crisis talks after appearing to lose the support of key investors. The embattled company is already facing multiple criminal investigations in the US, with the prospect of civil cases to follow. 11 million diesel cars worldwide are known to be affected.
There's no one in the driving seat at Volkswagen.
Martin Winterkorn will step down from his position.
Well, the news destroyed the case for diesel cars as a greener alternative to petrol. It also solved the mystery of why the switch to diesel hadn't delivered the air quality improvements that had been expected. The cheat devices have been fitted not only to VWs but to other models as well. 1.2 million diesels in the UK had them. A decade on, the scandal is seen as a turning point. Governments lost faith in the car industry to deliver cleaner combustion engines. Stuart Masson is the editor of The Car Expert. It offers advice on buying new and used cars. Stuart, what were the long-term consequences for VW? Has it recovered?
Good afternoon, Winifred. Look, largely, you could say Volkswagen has recovered. It's taken a decade, but in other ways, it is still profoundly affected by what happened when it all kicked off 10 years ago tomorrow. It was when, in America, the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, issued a report saying that it had discovered Volkswagen had been cheating. Most of the senior management have gone that were around at that time. In fact, all of them, I think. The company paid tens of billions of dollars in fines. It had to recall millions of vehicles. It had to scrap loads of vehicles in America. It was an enormous problem for Volkswagen. It had massive knock-on effects. And in many ways, it has affected the company in ways that are still very much being felt today.
What did it do for the value of the diesel cars that people had?
In the short term, they were hit pretty hard. The market has now changed significantly. I mean, back in the middle of the last decade, diesels made up about half of all new car sales. Today, it's about 5%. So in terms of new cars, which then filters into the used car market, there are far fewer diesel cars hitting the road today than there used to be. In terms of valuations today, diesel car valuations are actually pretty good because the supply has basically been decimated. For people who are looking for them in the used car market, you don't have anywhere near as many to choose from, and that has helped keep values more buoyant than for other types of cars.
How big a shock was it to the politicians who've been encouraging us all to have these diesel cars to discover that they had been cheated in the way they had?
Look, it was an absolute bolt from the blue. There had been a growing sort of body of evidence to say that diesel cars hadn't delivered collectively the sort of CO2 improvements that the world had been hoping to see. It was a step forward over what diesel cars produce slightly less CO2 than petrol cars, so there had been some improvements, but it wasn't really enough. And what was also being seen was that diesel cars were responsible for producing a lot more local air pollution, things that are called nitrogen dioxides, really toxic air pollution, particularly in urban areas where the air can't escape like it might in the country and mix with fresh air. So there'd been this body of evidence that said diesel cars are actually not that good in urban areas. But it was an absolute shock to find that part of the reason, at least, was that because one of the world's biggest manufacturers was deliberately telling its cars, had systems built into the cars to switch off all of the emissions control systems.
Do you really think it led to the policymakers being determined that we would switch to electric, or do you think that would always have happened?
It was always going to happen. There was, again, the growing awareness that diesel wasn't the future. America had never really embraced diesel. China had certainly never embraced diesel, and it had already realised diesel wasn't going to help with China's air pollution problems, and that they already were very much embracing electricity. But it was absolutely a catalyst for really giving the car industry and politicians all around Europe a wake-up call, because Europe was far more committed to diesels than the rest of the world. So Japanese car companies, Chinese American car companies really weren't anywhere near as committed to diesel as we were here in Europe. And it basically just killed off any discussion of diesel having a future from that point onwards. And of course, it was initially Volkswagen Group. It has spread to other manufacturers, but nothing like the same way, and certainly nothing as direct in terms of cheating and defrauding emissions testing.
It's still being disputed, isn't it, through the courts, how many brands and models may have had these cheat devices?
Yeah, there's ongoing class actions. It's moving sort of very, very slowly through courts here in the UK and other parts of the world across numbers of brands. Similar sorts of things, that the vehicles weren't completely complying with emissions rules when they're on the road. It's quite technical and in many ways quite clever. The car would realise that it was in a laboratory and it would have all the emissions kit was turned on. But if it realised that it wasn't in a laboratory, it would turn it all off, which would deliver much better performance, much better economy, but at the expense of pumping a lot of toxic nasties into the air. And that's how they were getting around it. They realised that if the front wheels were turning and the back wheels weren't turning, then you're in a lab. So it was quite a simple system. And if you weren't steering, then you were in a lab, because if you drive down a road, you were always constantly steering the wheel one way or the other. So the cars were able to work out that they were in a lab, and therefore all the emissions kit was kept on. But as soon as the car realised, after about 30 seconds, I'm not in a laboratory, then it turned it all off. And that's how they did it. Other manufacturers may or may not have similar sort of systems, but absolutely nothing like, supposedly, the really, really sneaky stuff that Volkswagen was doing.
How many people in the UK have already had some kind of financial compensation?
I'm not sure. There was nothing here in the UK, anything like the sort of fines and compensation that Volkswagen was required to provide in places like America, where they were hit over the head really, really hard by the EPA, which at that time still wielded an awful lot of power that it doesn't really anymore. But here in the UK, from a legal point of view, they kind of got off scot-free because of the wording of our laws compared to the wording of laws in America. So in the UK and Europe, they didn't really get hit anywhere quite as hard by governments and authorities. In terms of compensation, the results have varied. Here in the UK, I think they've had to pay out a lot less than they have in other countries, and they had a recall program where they did some kind of magic software update, which apparently didn't affect your car at all, but fixed the emissions problem, which was absolute nonsense, because if that was the case, they would have just fitted the software in the first place. So there's still stuff going on. There's a lot of class action stuff. How much money people are really going to see at the end of it, I don't think it's going to be a huge amount, certainly with the length of time that it's all being dragged out by.
Stuart Masson, editor at The Car Expert, thank you for coming on. The UK had its hottest summer on record this year, and it's made many people realise that their homes are unbearable when the temperatures really rise, particularly newer houses and flats that were built to retain the heat. Other countries have air conditioning, but we don't tend to have it here. Only 5% of homes in the UK has aircon, compared with more than 90% in the US. But that may change. Air conditioning companies are reporting big growth in sales. Tim Westcott had an air conditioning unit installed a few years ago.
We moved into this house about 4 years ago, and we quickly realised that we probably need air conditioning because my wife and I both work from home, and our home office in particular can become unbearable during a heat wave. We've had a fair few of those this summer, and we realised that we actually had the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, because we also wanted to electrify our heating at the same time. And in the UK, that's most commonly involves getting an air source heat pump to replace your gas boiler to run hot water through your radiators. But not many people realise that air conditioning is also an air source heat pump and can be used in heating mode to provide heating in the winter as well as cooling in the summer. Our system is actually almost a whole house system. We've got 5 indoor units installed, along with 2 outdoor units, and that cost us £8,500. So before we got the air conditioning installed, we had trouble keeping the house cool because the windows in this house are particularly large. They're much larger than they really should be. So there was only so much we could do in terms of blocking out the sun using blinds or curtains or whatever. And we did have some fans, but they were definitely inadequate when it came to trying to cool the office in particular. So in terms of running costs, we're actually in the fortunate situation of having solar panels and a battery system as well as the air conditioning. So in fact, during the summer, our air conditioning is essentially free because it's running entirely from our solar panels. And given the heat waves that we've had this summer in particular, we are extremely pleased that we made that decision 4 years ago to get the air conditioning installed.
So that's Tim Westcott. Andrew Sissons is the Deputy Director of the Sustainable Future Mission at Nesta, that's the UK's innovation agency. And Hamid Salimi speaks for Daikin, it's an air conditioning manufacturers. Hi both and welcome both. Hamid, if I could start with you, how much growth have you seen in air conditioning installations in the UK over recent years?
We have seen a significant growth, and Daikin believes that we are seeing a rise in air conditioning, also known as air heat pump. Many people think that air conditioning only provides cooling, but they provide cooling as well as heating. And that's the penny drop. The UK as our society is moving away from fossil fuels towards the electrification of heat. And again, combining in air heat pump with the PV panels, with the batteries, for example, will help us as a nation to meet our target of net zero. Also, there are, again, consumer awareness. There are benefits of air heat pump. They have air filtration. They remove allergens, for example, by trapping it in the filters. And some technologies can offer heating, cooling, air filtration and hot water. So they are a very good, perfect replacement for your gas boiler.
Andrew Sissons, we don't have air conditioning in the UK because we heat our homes with gas rather than electricity. And as Tim was saying, we tend to have a gas boiler that is heating water that is going into radiators. In countries that have heating and cooling systems that are combined, obviously their history is different. The way they've built their homes are different. Can you see that really changing here with anything apart from new builds?
That is true, but it's also the case that heat pumps are quite flexible and they work in a lot of different contexts. So, for example, in Scandinavia, which is colder than Britain typically and is the heat pump capital of Europe, they use these air-to-air systems quite widely as well. And that partly reflects the nature of the building. But actually, there isn't really a barrier, even to an old Victorian or older home. There isn't really any particular reason you can't install one of these systems and warm your home. You just need to make sure it's big enough and is sort of rightly spec'd for the home you have.
Are there any restrictions that would prevent people from doing what you describe, take the boilers out if you want to and replace it with some kind of aircon system? You do see it, don't you, where people have vents in the floors usually that are pumping either warm or cold air?
So most systems in people's homes will be, as Tim described, a kind of single unit in each room, which will sort of pump out hot or cold air as needed. The one restriction that has been a big barrier in the past, but recently was relaxed by the government, was around needing planning permission for most systems that could cool as well as heat. And happily in May, the government relaxed that restriction, making it easier for people to install these systems. There is, though, still a challenge around flats. People live in flats, and that is a bit of a problem because a lot of people in flats live in cities, which tend to be hotter and tend to be really well suited to this air-to-air system. Now, the situation with flats is more complicated because you can't install multiple outdoor heat pumps on a flat building. You kind of allowed, I think, typically one per block at the moment, and so you need to go through planning permission, which can add cost as well as delays. So I think that is something the government will need to look further at, is how to make this technology easier and more manageable in flats, while obviously managing what you don't want to do is sort of create a lot of clutter outside buildings. So there is and sometimes the best solution to this is to have shared systems. We have sort of one unit powering a whole building, which is also common offices. So there are some barriers, but there is a clear line for the government to make it easier for people to install these systems.
Hamid Salimi, the heat pumps that are being installed now, will they all run both hot and cold, or are these a new generation of them?
Majority of the heat pumps, but by its nature, heat pump provides the way they work. They move heat from one place to another. So they'll move heat from the place where it's not needed into the place where it's not objectionable. And what you do is with the push of a button, you reverse that process. So a heat pump can be run to provide air conditioning or remove heat from your room in summer, but it can be run in reverse to grab the heat or trap the heat from outside from your garden and then transfer it into your house. So almost all the heat pumps that we see, and there are different types of heat pumps, air-to-water heat pumps, air-to-air heat pumps, but all the heat pumps that we see, they provide both heating and cooling.
Andrew Sissons, it is thought that in time, the price of electricity relative to gas will fall. When that happens, do you think that people will just install ordinary electric heating and air conditioning systems?
I think that's quite unlikely. The price of electricity is a really important factor, and Britain has much more expensive electricity relative to gas. A lot of other countries have much cheaper electricity and have a lot more heat pumps. The reason, though, that heat pumps are likely to be favoured is that they are just so much more efficient than direct electric systems. So a heat pump will give you 2 or 3 times more heat per unit of energy than a direct electric system, and that is a huge bonus, and it saves you, even if electricity is cheap, it saves you a huge amount of money, and it also means there's less pressure on the electricity system, less risk of the grid falling over, and so there is a huge advantage. Admittedly, there is a slightly higher upfront cost, but the payback in terms of much less energy use and much greater efficiency, and therefore much lower energy bills, is great. But we have to get to that place where electricity is cheap enough to justify doing this first, and that is something the government can take action on, because a big part of the cost of electricity is taxation that's added to electricity. So if the government can right that and correct kind of problems with the way electricity bills are set, that would be open the door hugely to a lot more heat pumps, as we see in many other countries.
And what will be the environmental impacts if more and more people in the UK use air conditioning?
There is a small environmental impact, obviously, using extra electricity in the summer, but actually it's a lot smaller than it used to be because the electricity grid is so much greener. And actually, most of the time when you need air conditioning, it's also very sunny, and because we have so much more solar power on our grid, typically the days with air conditioning, electricity tends to be coming from solar and quite clean. But it's also the case that the heating problem is a much bigger problem than the cooling problem. So if you use your air-to-air heat pump to heat as well as cool, and you sort of reduce or replace your gas boiler in doing so, the savings environmentally are huge. So getting air conditioning, as long as you use it for heating as well as cooling, is a really big environmental win.
That was Andrew Sissons and Hamid Salimi talking to me a little bit earlier. Across the UK, 4 out of 10 people of working age are not saving enough for their retirement. That's according to the Department for Work and Pensions. It's not surprising in this prolonged cost of living squeeze. In a recent survey for the financial education company Wealth at Work, almost a quarter of people in work said they had borrowed money from family and friends, and almost a fifth had debts. On top of that, we don't understand pensions and investments or what priority to give them over our other financial commitments. We asked on X for a couple of volunteers willing to talk about their pension provision and the circumstances. Helen Ridley stepped up, and so did Alex Cobb. Helen's 42. She's a self-employed illustrator. She lives in Reading. Alex is 29. He works for a construction company and he lives in Maidenhead. So hello both, and thanks both for doing this for us. Alex, tell us a bit more about what you do for a living.
Hi, so I work in the construction industry as a stakeholder manager, so looking after third-party relationships. So day-to-day pensions aren't on my mind, but when you think of the future, mortgages, living costs, I think you touched on, you do sometimes think today's very current, but tomorrow can come by in a flash, and I sort of go, will I have enough? And I think with all the political talk about state pensions and whether it's viable in the long term, it makes me think about my own workplace pension and what I'll need to be able to sustain a decent standard of living when the time comes that I would like to settle to retire. And a lot of people my age probably don't think about it, but it's something that's always on my mind, and I'm not an expert in, so always keen to learn more.
How much are you saving at the moment, Alex?
So I've maxed out my pension contribution that I can with my employer, so that they contribute the max they can in the scheme. But over my working life, maybe I could have contributed more when I was with my previous companies. And I sort of go, will that mature enough over the next sort of 2-3 decades to sustain, to live comfortably if there wasn't a state pension?
How much have you put away?
Yes,
how much have you put away?
So I put 5% in, my employer put 7%. So it works out between us around £600 a month that goes into my pension, which is a good amount.
Yeah.
But obviously with inflation and things, that money, when I looked into Legal in General to look at it, doesn't really seem to have grown too much. I know that obviously you have to wait decades for it to mature and it will accumulate, but I do think will that pop when it eventually matures, when I get to my 60s, be enough?
Well, that raises some important questions, doesn't it, about what is done with our money and whether we understand that. Helen, have you always been self-employed?
No, I haven't actually. I've been self-employed as an illustrator for the last 5 years, but that's been alongside part-time jobs as well.
So you have pension pots from work you did when you were younger?
Yes, I have about 15 years at least of 15 to 20 years of pension pots from previous roles when I worked full time.
And are you saving now?
Yes, so since I have become self-employed, and at the moment, although I have a part-time job, my self-employed income is my larger income. So I do have a small pension pot with my part-time employer, but the majority of my sort of contributions now are from my self-employed income.
And how does that work if you were self-employed? Because as I understand it, you can, through the tax people, arrange for your contributions to be tax-free. Is that right?
That's my understanding from having spoken to my accountant. So I have what's called an SIPP or SIP, which is a self-invested personal pension, which is what was recommended to me actually by my sister. When she was self-employed, she set up a similar system. So it just gives you the option to pay into a pension pot regardless of the fact that you have an employer or not. So you could set one up as well as having your employer's pension if you wanted to. And obviously, because I have the two types of income, I wanted to set up my own one. And I decided to use Pension Bee, which has an app. And through that, it's very easy to set up my account, set up a direct debit, which then comes out of my my business account basically each month. And then HMRC top up that contribution. So, for example, if I were to pay in £100, they would then pay an extra £25 on top of that. And yes, I believe it is also tax deductible. You know, it's kind of I can pay as much as I want into without it being into a pension pot without it being taxed.
Well, let me bring in Claire Barrett, the consumer editor of the Financial Times. She's the author of the FT's Sort Your Financial Life Out newsletter series and a lot more besides. Claire, this is absolutely your stomping ground. What do you make of the provision that Alex and Helen are making for themselves?
Well, Winifred, music to my ears, because the biggest problem in this country, as you correctly said, is that we're not saving enough into pensions. So Alex, I believe, is 29, he said, and he's already maxing out his pensions. Big tick. Absolutely brilliant that he's maximising the amount of money that his employer is paying in. The money that your employer pays into your pension, that's on top of your salary. And many people who opt out of a workplace pension don't realise that. They're giving up this free money that's on the table if you pay in a little bit yourself. And in his case, he's not paying in very much, but his employer's paying in more. Anyone who's employed listening to this, who doesn't know if their employer will pay in a bit more if they do, send an email to HR now and find out if your company will match additional pension contributions. Because while you are in work, make the most of this, because as we've seen with Helen, who's self-employed, very unusual for a self-employed person to take the steps that she has to proactively set up a pension. So again, big tick for her, but it's much harder to save if you're self-employed or indeed if you're working part-time. So really great examples here. And yes, pension savings up to a point are tax-free. It's a really efficient way to save for your retirement. And the key message I would give to anyone listening is that the earlier you start, the easier it is. Pensions are not just for pensioners. Most people don't think about it until they're within touching distance of retirement. But it's never too late. Equally, you're going to stay retired or in a state of between working and retiring, you know, for many decades. So you need those investments to grow and to be able to support you.
And when Alex has looked at what's in his pension savings account and it's with a big pensions provider, he's disappointed it doesn't seem to be doing a lot. We don't understand investments, do we? What do we really need to understand when we look at our pensions and how they're performing?
Well, I wouldn't want to put people off and to say you need to be an expert in investing to have a pension, because the truth is you don't. Your pension deductions are taken automatically from your wages through auto-enrolment if you work full-time and earn more than £10,000 a year. That captures a lot of people into pension saving without really thinking about it. But if you are more aware and more engaged, then yes, you absolutely should look at what your pension's invested in. You can make changes. If you don't do anything, it will be in what's called the default fund, a vanilla kind of spread of investments that are suitable for most people. But if you're younger, you might want to take a higher level of risk because you've got longer for that money to grow. And certainly I would advise anyone, the pension companies are making it much easier with apps, as Helen said, to find out more about this. And there's loads of free resources online at the moment for Pensions Awareness Week. If you go on the Pensions Awareness Day website, there's free webinars on all kinds of things like consolidating pensions pots, which, as Helen was saying, that's a massive problem that the industry and the government are trying to resolve with this long-promised pensions dashboard. Finding lost pensions, that's a £30 billion problem again. Webinars on that, and also tips for people who are self-employed who are thinking, well, how can I go about sorting out a pension? Even if you've only got small sums of money to invest, doing something is better than doing nothing.
Generally speaking, how big a priority should pension savings be when you look at your other outgoings? I have saved into a pension when I had, for example, when I was younger, big credit card debt. And obviously now that I'm older, I don't regret having done that, even though some people might think that was daft. I mean, what priority would you give it?
Well, I think we've seen from the inflation figures today, haven't we? The cost of living is just not, it's a constant pressure. And people who have to opt out of pension saving, as I said, you're losing that free money that your employer would give you on top of your salary. So that's why it can be doubly damaging. If you absolutely have to, because your financial circumstances are that dire, then okay, it's a lever that you can pull. But I would urge people to try and restart pension saving as quickly as they can. But the fact of the matter is, Winifred, for some people, just getting through today is enough of a struggle. Putting any sort of form of money aside for tomorrow, whether that's a rainy day savings pot or a pension for when they retire, is frankly becoming a luxury for far too many people. But at least if you understand what the options are, the fact that it might not cost you as much as you think because you're not paying tax on the money that you're investing into your pension, and the fact that your employer will top up your savings too, just be aware of what you might be giving up if you opt out.
Helen and Alexander, what do you make of that advice? Claire thinks that you're both doing okay. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's just been said. I guess my concern is Obviously, provisions in the past, and look at my own parents who've retired recently, they've got their private pensions, which have done well, and schemes were generally more generous from employers in the past. And that is because of the economy today. My concern is, am I saving enough to live comfortably, because the state pension might not exist at the time I retire in the future? So I wonder how much I should be putting into a SIP and what percentage of extra income I might need versus my salary. Because you sort of look at it, you know that your salary today is not what you would retire on your pensionable income. So I don't know where I should be sort of trying to target if I wanted to top up elsewhere.
Helen, briefly, if you would, what do you think of what Claire said?
Yeah, I kind of agree with so I agree with that point, and that it's hard to project. Retirement for me is still quite some way away. It's hard to know, with the cost of living going as crazy as it is currently, what's going to be happening in the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's really hard to predict that. I recently had a look at what is in my currently in my state pension, which was really interesting, and that would be fine for me if I didn't have to pay rent. I do currently have,
we were talking about this earlier in the programme. Housing
exactly.
costs.
I remember listening to one of your callers.
Yes,
and
yesterday.
That really made me think it'll be so common that not everyone is going to have a mortgage that maybe is paid off by retirement. I personally am hoping to have that be the case, but you don't know what life is going to throw at you, and that's a long way away. So
well, I'll stop you there.
Pension is fine if you have very basic living expenses and don't really have to pay rent or a mortgage, but it's not really practical at all in other situations.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there just because we run out of time. As Claire said, it is Pension Awareness Week and there's lots of information online. Thank you all so much for that. Thank you. Tomorrow, Shari Val's going to be here after the news at 12 with another Scam Secrets, and this week they're looking at fake bailiffs. That's when you get a call from someone claiming they are